Morning my father left for Phoenix, he spent 11 minutes looking for his car keys. I counted. I was 13 years old and I counted because counting was something to do with my hands. Something that kept me from saying what I actually wanted to say, which was, "You are not coming back." I knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes color. Something in the pressure. Something in the way he moved through the house like he was already somewhere else. He found the keys on the hook by the door. He always kept them on that hook. He looked at them like he'd never seen them before. My father's name was Dale. He was 41 and he had a laugh that filled rooms and a habit of making promises in the same easy tone other people use to talk about the weather. He'd been saying he was going to Phoenix for a work contract since March. By July, I understood that the work contract had a name, and her name was not work. My mother had been gone since I was 4, not dead, just gone. She sent cards sometimes, the kind with pre-printed sentiments and her signature in blue ink, no personal note. I stopped opening them when I was 10. My father and I had been a unit of 2 for 9 years, and whatever that unit was, it had worked. Not perfectly. Not the way the families in school pictures looked like they worked, but it had been something. He set $15 on the kitchen table. Not an envelope, not a note. Just 3 fives, face up, slightly creased. He said he'd transferred money to my account. He said Mrs. Dempsey next door knew I was on my own and would check in. He said it would be 2 weeks, maybe 3. He'd call every other day. I was old enough to handle this. I was 13. I stood in the doorway and watched him put his 2 bags in the trunk of his car, and I did not cry because I had learned early that crying in front of my father made him uncomfortable in a way that made me feel responsible for his discomfort, so I had trained myself out of it. He waved from the driveway. I waved back. The car turned out of the cul-de-sac, and I stood there another full minute after it disappeared. Then I went inside and checked the refrigerator. Half a block of cheddar, 3 eggs, a jar of pickles, and 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup. The pantry had pasta, a box of crackers, and a bag of rice. I opened my bank app. My balance was $43. He had not transferred money. I did the math the way I'd been taught to do math, slowly and without skipping steps. 3 weeks was 21 days. $58 total, $2.76 per day. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and I did not panic, which I think now was the most frightening part of the whole thing. I did not panic because this was not entirely new. I had been managing myself for years. I just had not been doing it this completely. Mrs. Dempsey was 74 and had bad knees and a Cairn Terrier named Pickwick. She had not, as far as I could tell, been told anything. When she saw the empty driveway on day 3, she knocked and asked if everything was all right. I said yes. My dad was traveling for work. She gave me a look that people give when they don't want to push but they're not entirely convinced. She said to knock if I needed anything. I said I would. I did not knock. There's a particular kind of pride that develops in children who are left to manage too early. It doesn't feel like pride. It feels like competence, which is different. Competence is quieter and it doesn't ask for anything and it becomes, over time, its own trap. I was competent. I made the rice last. I rationed the crackers. I walked to the dollar store and bought 2 cans of beans and a package of ramen and came home and ate half of 1 ramen pack for dinner and saved the other half for breakfast and told myself this was fine. This was temporary. This was 2 weeks, maybe 3. He called once in the first week. I could hear music behind his voice and the particular acoustics of an apartment I had never been inside. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He said good, great, the contract was going well, he'd be home before I knew it. He did not ask about food, he did not ask about food, he did not ask about money. The call lasted 4 minutes and I know this because I looked at my phone screen when it ended and the screen said 4 minutes and I remember thinking that was how long it took to become certain. I was on the honor roll. I want to say this not as a brag but as context, because it matters for what comes next. I was a good student, organized, the kind of kid who turned things in early and helped other kids with their homework and did not, generally speaking, cause concern. This worked against me for a while. The teachers who might have looked more closely did not look closely because I gave them no reason to. I was fine. I was competent. I lost 7 pounds in the first 3 weeks. I know this number because of what happened at school, which I'll get to, but at the time, I didn't know it. I just knew that my genes were sitting differently and that I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, and that by sixth period every day I was having trouble concentrating in a way that I could feel physically, a kind of thinness behind my eyes. My history teacher that year was Mr. Calloway. He was 28 and had just finished his second year of teaching and had the slightly overwhelmed energy of someone still learning the job. But he noticed things. He noticed when students were different. He'd asked me twice in the first week how things were going. The kind of ask that's a real question, not a hallway greeting. I'd said fine both times. The third time he asked, I was sitting at my desk after class and I had taken too long to put my notebook in my bag because I was tired and my hands felt slow, and he pulled a chair and sat across from me. He didn't ask how I was. He said, "You don't have to tell me anything, but if something is wrong, there are people who can help, and it does not have to stay the way it is." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "My dad went to Phoenix." He said, "When is he coming back?" I said, "I'm not sure he is." He was quiet for a moment. He asked when I'd last eaten a full meal. I told him I wasn't sure. He reached into his desk drawer and handed me a granola bar without making it a thing. Just set it in front of me and looked away while I ate it, which was the most tactful thing anyone had done for me in weeks. He said, "I have to make a call. You understand that?" I said yes. I want to explain something about that moment. There is a thing that happens when you have been managing alone for a long time and someone finally says they are going to do something about it. It should feel like relief, and it does. But underneath the relief there is fear, because you don't know what the doing something will look like. You don't know if it will make things worse. I'd heard enough from other kids to know that the system people called when parents weren't around didn't always land you somewhere better. I was afraid of being moved somewhere I didn't know. I was afraid of what happened next. But I was also, and this is the part I didn't have words for at 13, exhausted from pretending that nothing was wrong. I ate the granola bar. I said okay. The school counselor, Ms. Frick, was in the room within 10 minutes. She was methodical and calm, and she asked me questions in the way that someone asks questions when they're filling in a picture they've already started, and I answered them. She called the nurse. The nurse weighed me and asked when I had last had a full meal and wrote things down. I sat on the cot in the nurse's office and stared at the drop ceiling, and I thought about my father in Phoenix, and I tried to decide how I felt about him, and I couldn't quite get there, which I also now recognize as a symptom of not having eaten enough for 3 weeks. My father called that evening. Someone from the school had reached him. His voice was different from all the other calls, tighter, a register that I recognized as the voice he used when he felt cornered. He said, "What exactly did you tell them?" I said, "The truth." He said, "You know what this looks like. You know what you're doing to this family." I said, "There are 2 people in this family, and one of them is me." He hung up. I had never said anything like that to him before. I sat with the phone in my hand, and I noticed that my hands were not shaking, which surprised me. And I thought about what he'd said, and I thought about the word family and what it meant when only one person in it was present. And then I got up and I found a notebook and I started writing things down. I wrote down the date he left. I wrote down the amount he'd said he'd transferred and the amount that had actually appeared. I wrote down the call logs, which I had not deleted. I wrote down what was in the refrigerator on the day he left and what I'd eaten each day and how much I had spent and where. I wrote down his statement about Mrs. Dempsey knowing I was on my own and put a question mark next to it. Then I went to Mrs. Benji. Dempsey's door and knocked and asked as casually as I could whether my dad had said anything to her before he left. She said, "About what, sweetheart?" I said, "About what, sweetheart?" I said, "About me being alone." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No." She paused. "How long has he been gone?" 23 days, I said. She put her hand over her mouth. I went back inside and wrote that down too. The next morning, Miss Frick told me that a caseworker named Mr. Bowman would be coming to the house that afternoon. I want to tell you that I felt ready for this. I didn't. I felt the way you feel before a test you studied for, but still can't quite believe you're prepared for. I walked home and I stood in the kitchen, and I looked at the notebook and I thought about what evidence meant, and I thought about what Mr. meant. Calloway had said, which was, it does not have to stay the way it is. I put the notebook on the table, and I also put the call logs and the bank statements I had printed at the school library, and the 3 grocery receipts I had saved, and a photograph I had taken of the refrigerator on day 1, because something had told me to, some instinct I didn't understand yet, and I laid them out in order. Mr. Bowman arrived at 4:15. He was a quiet man, unhurried, and he moved through the house the way someone moves when they are taking inventory, which is what he was doing. He opened the refrigerator. He looked at the pantry. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and he looked at everything I had laid out, and he looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "You kept records." I said, "Someone told me evidence was the thing that got believed." He looked at me. He said, "Who told you that?" I said, "A neighbor." From another situation, he wrote something down. He said, "You've been here alone for how long?" I said, 23 days. He wrote that down too. The legal part moved faster than I expected once it started moving. The school medical report documented weight loss and signs of malnutrition. The bank records, obtained through the process Mr. Bowman set in motion, showed that the transfer my father had promised had been initiated and then canceled the same day he arrived in Phoenix. He had not, as he later told the court, forgotten. He had decided it was fine. He had done the calculation that I would manage, and that managing would be enough, and that he would deal with the rest when he got back. He had spent $600 in his first week in Phoenix on a weekend trip to Sedona with the woman he had moved there to be with. I am not telling you this to make my father a villain. I am telling you this because the math matters. The math always matters. The math is what turns a story into evidence. My aunt on my mother's side, a woman named Gloria who I had not seen in 4 years and who lived in a small house in New Mexico with a vegetable garden and a dog named something I couldn't pronounce correctly, filed emergency guardianship paperwork within 48 hours of being contacted by Mr. Bowman. I did not know she had been contacted. I did not know she had paperwork ready within 48 hours. When Mr. Bowman told me, I asked him how she had responded so quickly. He said she had asked only one question before agreeing, "Is she safe right now?" I had to sit with that for a minute. My father was reached by phone and then in person and then through his attorney, in that order. He cooperated in the specific way people cooperate when the evidence leaves them no other choice. His attorney told the court it had been a lapse in judgment, a miscommunication, an error of a well-intentioned but overwhelmed single parent. The judge, a woman named Judge Tremblay who had been on the family court bench for 16 years and whose face when she read the bank records told you everything you needed to know about what she was thinking, declined to describe it that way. She used the word abandonment. She used it twice. My father received a suspended sentence, 2 years of supervised probation, a permanent mark on his record. His parental rights were not terminated, but they were restructured in a way that meant he could not make unilateral decisions about my care, my residence, or my finances for the next 4 years. I did not attend the sentencing hearing. Gloria had driven up from New Mexico and was sitting in the waiting room outside the courtroom with her dog, whose name I had now learned to say correctly, Biscochito, after the New Mexico State cookie, which she explained to me during the drive and which made me laugh for the first time in longer than I could accurately remember. The courtroom had a window that looked out onto the parking lot. I sat with Gloria and the dog and watched cars come and go, and she didn't try to explain anything or fill the silence, and I appreciated that more than I had words for. After, Mr. Bowman came and told us the outcome. Gloria put her hand on the back of my neck, the way you might steady someone who's just stood up too fast. She said, "It's done. Let's go home." I said, "Home?" She said, "Yes. I want to tell you something about arriving at Gloria's house for the first time." It was September. The drive from our suburb had taken most of a day, and by the time we turned onto her road, the light was going horizontal and gold across the high desert in a way I had never seen before, because I had never been anywhere that looked like this. Her house was not large. It had a porch with 2 chairs and a wind chime made out of what looked like old silverware and a vegetable garden along the south fence that was doing better than it had any right to be doing in September. She showed me my room, which had a twin bed with a quilt on it and a window that faced east and a small desk under the window, and she said, "You can change anything you want." I said I wouldn't. She said, "You might want to eventually. Give it time." She made dinner that first night. Actual dinner, the kind that takes more than one pot and produces steam and smells like something. We ate at a table that had candles on it. Not for any occasion, just because she liked candles. She asked me questions that were not about what had happened, just questions about me, the kind of questions adults rarely ask children because they assume they already know the answers or because they don't think children's preferences merit inquiry. She asked what I liked to read. She asked if I had strong feelings about cilantro. She asked what I thought about mornings. I said I hadn't decided about mornings yet. She said that was a very reasonable position. There is a thing that happens over time when you are in a place where the floor holds. I don't know how else to describe it. A place where dinner happens at dinner time and the lights stay on and the person who lives there does not disappear, and you know this not because they have said so, but because their actions accumulate into a pattern, and the pattern is, I am here, I will continue to be here. You do not have to brace for the next thing. It takes longer than you'd expect to believe it. Months, in my case. There were mornings in those first months when I still did the math automatically, scanned the refrigerator, counted what was there. Old habits don't dissolve on command. They thin gradually, like paint fading in sunlight, and then one day you realize you haven't done the count in a week, and you don't know exactly when you stopped. Gloria came to every school event and wrote them on a paper calendar on the kitchen wall with a specific marker she used only for my things. A dark green one, and I noticed this and did not say anything about it for a long time. And then one day I said, "You use the green one for my stuff." She said, "Yes." I said, "Why green?" She said it was her favorite color and she wanted my things in her favorite color. I had to leave the room after that. I was accepted to college early decision, full merit scholarship, pre-law. When the letter came, Gloria read it and then handed it back to me and said, "Well?" I said, "Well." She made dinner with 2 pots again and put candles on the table. My father emailed twice in the year after the proceedings. Both emails were long and careful and used the phrase "moving forward" several times each. The first one I deleted. The second one I read all the way through and then saved in a folder I labeled with a date, not his name. I haven't responded. I think about it sometimes. What I would say. Whether there is anything to say. Whether the saying would be for him or for me. I don't have an answer to that yet. What I know is that the decision belongs to me. I know this in a way I didn't use to know things. A way that came from having had no choices for a while and then slowly, incrementally getting them back. I'm 26 now. I'd been in law school for 2 years. I have a small apartment with a window I like and a plant that is not dead, which feels like an accomplishment, and a jar of extra money I keep on my counter not because I need it, but because I need to see it, to know it's there, to have the physical evidence that things are different now. Old habits and all of that. Someone asked me recently what I would say to my 13-year-old self if I could. I thought about it for longer than they expected. I think I'd say, keep the receipts, not just the paper kind. The record you keep of what actually happened. The dates and the details and the things you said and the things you were told. That record is not paranoia. That record is the thing that gets believed. The truth on its own is not always enough. The truth, documented, dated, laid out in order. That's the thing that changes rooms. I'd also say, the people who are supposed to take up the most space in your life are not always the ones who actually do. Some of them will be teachers who sit down in a chair and ask the real question. Some of them will be neighbors who knock on doors with the careful knock of someone who already suspects the answer. Some of them will be women in New Mexico who file paperwork within 48 hours and use green markers and make dinners that take 2 pots and never once, not once, make you feel like a burden. The floor can hold. It took me a long time to believe it. I believe it now. Have you ever been the one in your family who held everything together before you were old enough to know that wasn't your job? I'd like to know what that looked like for you. Because some of us were handed responsibilities with both hands before anyone thought to ask if we could carry them, and a lot of us are still figuring out what to put down. I think about the jar on my counter a lot, not every day anymore, but enough. It's just a mason jar with some folded bills in it. Not a lot of money, nothing that would matter to most people, but I keep it where I can see it from the couch, from the kitchen, from the door when I come home. Old habit that became a choice. There's a difference between those two things, and learning to tell them apart took me most of my 20s. What happened to me when I was 13 was not an accident. That's the thing I had to sit with longest. My father Dale didn't forget to transfer the money. He canceled the transfer the same day he landed in Phoenix. He made a calculation that I would manage, that managing was enough, that the gap between surviving and being cared for wasn't his problem to close. People who do that aren't always monsters. Sometimes they're just people who decided their own comfort was worth more than someone else's safety, and then told themselves a story about it afterward. The story my father told was that I was capable. And I was. But capability is not consent. Being able to survive something is not the same as it being acceptable to put you through it. I kept records because a neighbor from another situation, someone whose name I never even knew properly, had told me once that evidence was the thing that got believed. I was 13 and I took that seriously because something in me understood, even then, that the truth on its own wasn't going to be enough. That's not cynicism. That's intelligence. The practical kind. The kind that develops in people who have learned early that no one is automatically on their side. The notebooks, the receipts, the call logs, the photograph of an empty refrigerator, none of that was paranoia. It was me deciding that my experience deserved to be documented, that it was real, and it mattered, and I was going to make sure there was a record. Mr. Calloway sat down in a chair and asked the real question. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. He didn't have to do that. He chose to. And Gloria filed paperwork within 48 hours of a phone call asking only whether I was safe right now. Not, is this convenient? Not, what will people think? Just, is she safe? The people who show up like that. The ones who make the deliberate choice to see you and act on what they see. They are not accidents either. They are people who decided that someone else's well-being was worth their effort. That decision has consequences too, good ones, the kind that compound over time. Here's what I believe, not because anyone told me to believe it, but because I lived it. The choices we make about other people, to see them or not see them, to act or look away, to show up or calculate our own convenience, those choices don't disappear, they accumulate. They become the record, and eventually, one way or another, the record gets read. I have a plant that is not dead. I have a window I like. I have a jar on my counter that I can see from the door. I start my 3rd year of law school in the fall. None of that happened to me. I built it piece by piece from what I had, which for a while was very little. That's the part worth keeping. Not the suffering. The building.